This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Connecticut Green Bank Board of Directors meeting. I'm going to call this meeting to order at, that would be 9:06 your time, Eastern Standard Time on October 21st, 2022. First, are there any public comments? Okay, hearing none. I want to welcome, we have a new board member, Dr. Joanna Wozniak-Brown, who comes to us, hi Joanna, who comes to us with an incredible resume and, and a lot of experience. Let's see, so she has for nearly 2 decades been in environmental management and planning in Connecticut, and she currently serves as the Climate and Infrastructure Policy Development Coordinator at the Connecticut Office of Policy and Management. And in that role, she leads the development and implementation of Connecticut's climate and sustainability strategies for the Office of Policy and Management. Small job, facilitates interagency collaboration on climate and sustainability issues, including incorporation of climate resilience and adaptation planning in state plans. She represents the secretary on various boards, including this one. Let's see, she has her PhD from Antioch University and master's from Johns Hopkins University. And she has layers and layers of experience. So we welcome you, Joanna.
That's a lot for 9 o'clock in the morning.
It's a lot for 5:05, I'll tell you that. I'm in Alaska at the moment, so.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I've long admired the Green Bank's activity and watched its growth over the past several years. And I'm excited to be hopefully helpful to you as well as you serve out your mission and making sure that other Connecticut programs are either not getting in the way or helping us jump forward as we start to chip away at the climate crisis. And Connecticut's long been a leader in mitigation. And now with the governor's executive orders and recent legislation, we're also leaping ahead in adaptation and resilience. So I look forward to being a partner and to learning from all of you as well. So thank you.
Thank you, and we're really happy to have you aboard. And you bring the skill set that is going to be applied on a minute-by-minute basis as we go forward with just huge, as we all know, responsibilities. So let's see, the next item is the consent agenda, which has 4 items on it. And Brian, did you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I'll just provide some high level and probably give a little bit deeper with our new board member. So we've got the approval of the meeting minutes of the regular meeting from July 22nd and the special meeting from July 28th. We've also got the transactions under 500,000 and no more in aggregate than $1 million. So that is a staff approval of transactions that are consistent with our comprehensive plan and budget. So we try to do that, Joanna, to move transactions through. If they're over 500,000 and less than $2.5 million, they go to the deployment committee. And anything greater than $2.5 million usually has to go through the deployment committee with a recommendation to then the full board for review and approval. So this is just a staff review of transactions under 500,000. And then the fiscal year 22 progress to targets. So those are the final memos for the incentive programs, financing programs, and investments. You all will recall that in July you approved the drafts. Those are important documents because we use them to do staff performance reviews over the summer. What was great to see when we reran these numbers in September was that they matched up to what we had in July. So that was a good data. Our data team's doing very well in terms of the timeliness of the data. So good stuff there. And then Cheryl worked really hard with all of you to set up the regular meeting schedules for the board and committee meetings, just continuing the regular cadence that we've been on there. So those are the 4 items under the consent agenda, and then there are just a few reports.
Okay, did we want to call for approval of that consent agenda? Are there any questions or comments?
This is Matt. I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Do I hear a second?
Second, John Harity.
Hey, John. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome. Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent. Okay, moving forward. All right, so on Tuesday, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Lonnie, forgive me. One other item here, just in terms of the updates, and I think I saw you, David, on the line, is we'll have David give us an update on the offering that we currently have in the market for the Green Liberty Notes. David, you there?
Brian, I'll just give the quick update since, oh, there, David, we can't hear you. If you come off mute, you can give the report.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yeah, so very happy to talk about our Green Liberty Notes. This 4th round is now live. We have about a week left. The last raise was completely sold out, which means that in that scenario, we go to the largest investor and trim them down until we get down back to the $250,000 maximum limit for our raise. It's a good problem to have, right? We're trying to prioritize the smaller investments. So hoping to have that happen again this time. As of a few days ago, we were around $140,000 in investment, including about half of those being Connecticut investors. And as of this morning, we're about 68% are in the $1,000 or less range. So really excited to see that. And yeah, this is a really great map of all the states where folks have invested from across the country. I think we're up to over 30 states now. So, and we have Alaska and Hawaii. So very cool stuff. We have about a week left in this raise. The interest rate is 3.5%. It's been rising with the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. So we have a really great offering, a week left. Please tell folks. Yeah, we're really proud of the total raise so far and hoping to fill up the $250,000 for this 4th raise.
And just to remind folks, these are 1-year notes, and the 3.5% compares quite favorably to CD rates of equivalent maturity around the country.
This is really exciting.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The popularity of these notes is incredibly exciting, and I loved when Texas jumped in big time. So we're doing great.
And Alaska, where you are.
Well, that's why it happened. I told them, I said, hey, yeah, no, it's exciting. It's exciting. And actually, they're telling me, one of the legislators I was talking to here in Alaska was telling me they want to start a green bank. So here we go.
Oh, yes. I'm very much involved in that activity.
Oh, you are? Okay, good. Okay.
Oh, yes.
All right. So our next item of business, let's see. Oh, audit, compliance, and governance. And we had a very vigorous meeting, I think about a week ago. So I think, do we want to have Tom Flynn and Jane Murphy and Eric talk about this?
Yes, this is Jane Murphy. I can start in.
Okay, Jane, great.
We did have the annual comprehensive financial report approved on the 11th at the ACG meeting, and we're bringing forward a summary to the board and a resolution. We're going to discuss the reports that the auditor issued and the required communications and a recommendation, and then I'll give you some contacts if anybody needs to get in touch with the audit firm directly. Next slide, please. So for FY22, there were some new things that occurred. The first being that we have a new audit firm. It's PKF O'Connor Davies. And we've had the firm, the previous firm, for 6 years, and we are required.
What is it called? JCJ.
Excuse me? For FY22, we have 2 new legal entities, the Green Liberty Notes that David was just speaking about, and CGBC PACE. Also, one of the biggest things we had was the implementation of standard GASB standard 87 for lease, where we had to go back and restate the prior year as well. Also for this year, the independent auditor's report has a new format where there is an opinion up front rather than at the end. Next slide, please. So the auditor's level of responsibility is to have an opinion on the financial statements as a whole, including the financials themselves and the footnotes. And for this year, PKF O'Connor Davies is giving us an unmodified opinion on our financial statements. There are other sections of the ACFR as well. The required supplementary information having to do with the pension. They have a limited review of this, basically tying financial information where they can. And then the introductory section and the statistical section at the front and the back of the financials, they have no responsibility for an opinion on that. Next slide, please. So I'm going to run through the financials very briefly. I know we have a lot of things to get through today. For our operating income, year over year, we increased by 4.8 million. Most of that was due to the RGGI auctions, where the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, over the course of the 4 auctions this year, we saw the prices go up substantially and just level off now. And one of the auctions actually had so much activity that they released extra allowances in to be bid on. So that gave most of the income coming through. Another addition was for rec sales of 0.9 million, and that was due to us having tranche 5 available now from the utilities and occurring in the FY22 results. That was a little bit offset by lower interest income on our promissory notes, and the big part of that was due to a restructuring of our LMI debt facility. There was a payoff involved and also lowering of interest rates. Next slide, please. So the operating expenses also decreased year over year, adding to our bottom line. One of the biggest components of this was the provision for loan loss decreased by about $3.8 million. We had been carrying some COVID reserves for a couple of years, and we really have not seen any losses materialize for those. So we did pull those off of the books, the COVID specific reserves. We still do have plenty of reserves for the standard reserving methodology we go through annually for the rest of our loans. We just released these extras. Within our program administration expenses, we're 2.1 million higher than the previous year, and the great majority of that has been for us to replace the revenue grade meters that are on most of the RSIP systems and also those in our Solar Lease 2 program, and this is due to the 3G shutdown. I'm sure we have talked about this in many different ways before, and this is how it comes through in the financials. Also, the G&A expenses are down by 0.7, and the big piece of that is decreases for our share of the pension and the OPEBs, which are the retiree health reserves. Those did come down for us this year. Are there any questions at all so far? Okay, next slide. So the non-operating revenue decreased by 3.3 million. Lots of moving pieces in here. We have lower debt issuance costs year over year. We actually did 2 issuances last year, and this year we had no issuances and just a couple of things due for annual certification. So that was substantially lower. Also, we had a increase in the unrealized gain on our swap because the interest rates have been increasing. We expect to see that increase as well in this year. And we had a decrease in our fair value of investments. Most of that was due to the fact that we had a valuation change last year on an asset REIT purchase, and really no activity this year at all. Next slide, please. So all of those results contributed to a 21.6 million increase in our net position year over year. If we look at the components of that, we had a 4.9 million decrease in non-expendable net position, and that really relates to things that we have to keep for our solar lease 2 and 3 tax equity programs, where the majority of the position is for the investor. And as those programs wind down, the non-expendable position is also, our exposure is decreasing. The unrestricted net position is up by 26.4, and if you can see it, it's a little bit of it is due to the Shrek ABS one and the Shrek warehouse, and most of those we just get the rec sales into those entities, and there are limited amounts of expense on the warehouse because we do not have any loans outstanding, and they're the only thing that really comes through for the Shrek ABS. That's where we have our ABS bond, and we have the interest expense in there. So that does contribute annually to the bottom line. Sepia Holdings has a small amount also coming through to the bottom line. Their loan portfolio is growing, and there was also a small release of the COVID-19 reserves there. The biggest component is really coming from the Green Bank, and that is due to operating income. We talked about the components of revenue being high and the expenses generally being lower. And of that 17.6, 3.2 million is coming from those reserve releases of the COVID-19 reserves. Any questions? Okay.
This is John Harity. I was just wondering, has inflation and rising interest rates does this report reflect the period when that was occurring, or is that before this?
For the valuation of our pension, it's actually a year before, so that does not reflect the interest rates. For things like our interest rate swaps, those are, they follow up to date. And I would
very little, Jane.
Yeah.
Very little. The Fed started increasing interest rates in March of this year. Little of that was reflected in what would have affected the swap rates, for instance, through the end of June. Of course, subsequent to the end of June, the change in rates has been quite dramatic. So what had been happening with those swaps over the last several years is, as interest rates were going down, there were non-realizable losses, so-called mark-to-market kind of losses required to be taken into consideration in our accounts. That's now reversing, as Jane said, with the increase of interest rates, and you'll see that happen a bit more, meaning that reversal and hence more gains. But these are all paper mark-to-market kind of activities as interest rates increase.
Yeah, and we have seen those monthly increases come through since the June 30 year end, and they were
Yeah,
slight before.
yeah. And Jane, if I might, it's Tom Flynn. John, thanks for your question. When I started looking at these financials, I want to kudos to the team for a strong financial performance and for monitoring things. I think that's all good news. However, a note of caution going forward, we had some one-time pickups. We did have some one-time hits this year, but we had a fair amount of one-time pickups relative to the reversal of some of these COVID reserves and relative to a pickup on pension and the allocation methodology, as well as the gains that were factored in from prior years in the stock market and in investments. And in fact, as we move forward, A, we won't have the pickup for those reserves anymore. B, if the economy starts to slow down much further, we might have some questions about our reserves. At least I would. And then you're not going to have the gain in pension, certainly with what's going on with the stock market. So I think the watchword here is as we enter this new inflationary period with the economists predicting a slowdown in the economy, and of course the stock market is caution. As they sometimes say in financial projections, past performance isn't necessarily an indicator of future performance. So I think when I look at this, I think we just need to remain diligent here as we move forward. I also, just because I don't want to continue to interrupt Jane, I just want to say, Jane and her team did a great job during this audit. Going through a first-year audit with a new firm is very challenging. It's probably the most detailed audit you go through. Obviously, they start to pick at different things that maybe your prior auditors had not picked at. They bring a fresh perspective. And by all accounts, by both Jane's team as well as by the audit team that the committee met with, they did a wonderful job. And they worked very collaboratively, and the auditors were very complimentary of the work that's been done. And so I appreciate that. And Jane, to you and the team, well done on that score.
Thank you, Tom.
And this is Lonnie, and I should say, Jane, how many pages was this particular audit compared to the last one that we had? I mean, I've never seen such analytics, and for Jane and her team to have to plow through them. But it's how complete it is really exciting.
Yeah, it's actually the back half that Eric does that is now larger than the actual audit that's in the front. I think we're about 128 pages, and he was 200 and something.
I've never been one for brevity, but
I had one other question, if I could.
Yes.
John, yes.
Is there, in terms of the salaries of people who work for the Green Bank, is there a cost of living adjustment, or has there been any adjustment, or is there any adjustment being planned because of inflation?
Eric, do you want to talk about that?
Certainly. So John, as part of the budget for this year, the board approved a cost of living adjustment that was effective at the start of this new fiscal year, so July 1st. We went ahead and implemented that, and that was 5% across the board.
Okay, thank you.
And that should be something that is part of our annual budget going forward. We'll look at what the general economy is doing and also reach out to our quasis so that we are in line with everybody else.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah, this is Dominic. Just a quick question on the statement of net position, and it's probably not as simple as splitting it up this way, but in thinking about the Green Bank's expanded mandate for environmental infrastructure and sort of the potential activities coming down the pike in that sphere, looking at that net positions slide, my understanding is that obviously a bunch of that is restricted by statute for energy related programs. Am I interpreting correctly that the unrestricted position is, in theory, like subject to all the caveats we discussed about caution and needing reserves and all that kind of thing. Is that sort of the theoretical pool that would be available to other types of non-energy programming?
Yes, with the caveat that the environmental infrastructure, we have to make sure that we don't use ratepayer funds for that. But we do have plenty of cash left over from our 2 bond issuances for last year, and that is probably about equal to what the unrestricted deficit is, and those can be used for funding those programs.
Okay, great, thanks.
Just a quick slide. This year we did spend over 750,000 of the ERA funds that we got way back when in 2012. So we have to do a federal single audit. And for that particular audit, we got an unmodified opinion as well. And there were no findings or any of the costs that we had were questioned. The costs that we had this year were for the interest rate buy downs that we did with the Smarty program. The auditors have some required communications, and for those that are charged with governance, they want us to know that there are estimates that are used within the financial statements. The biggest 3 of those are for the net pension and OPEB liabilities, that those come through from the actuaries that are hired by the state of Connecticut, and they do all of the plans and give the allocations to the Green Bank as well as the other quasis. Also, there are estimates on our allowance for uncollectible accounts and for the asset retirement obligation that we have for disposal costs of solar facilities at the end of their life. The auditors said that all of our disclosures were neutral, consistent, and clear, and we have given them management representations that will be used before the audit is issued. They said we have no material uncorrected misstatements, and they did have a couple of adjustments that they passed on. The first of which had to do with our recognition of the expenses that I had talked about on the previous slide for the federal ARA funds. And back in 2012, we recognized revenue for these particular grants that came in, because at that point in time, we had used them for loan loss reserves. As we repurpose them, typically what happens is that to the extent that you have expenses coming through, you should be recognizing pieces of the grant come through. So they passed on that adjustment because it was back in 2012, it made sense when we did it that way. But as we repurpose the funds, it tends to, it shows that we have grant expenses where there's not income to offset them. We are just about at the end of that program. We'll be spending the last of the funds this year. So it wasn't anything that was material, so they did pass on it. The other adjustment is that there are deferred financing costs within Solar Lease 2, and we've been amortizing those through it. It's really for a FASB accounting basis, but if we were doing them appropriately on GASB, they should have been expensed up front. It's not a material amount, so it was passed on. However, it is something when we do the standalone statements for Solar Lease 2 that they are done on a FASB basis. So it is, when we do the year-end audits for those entities, it is appropriately reported. They had one recommendation for us as well, and it was to make sure that we tighten up our documentation of approval of non-standard journal entries. And this is something that became a problem for us during COVID, where pre-COVID, we were all in the office and we were signing off on paper copies of things that we kept. Without COVID, or without being in the office, it's a little bit more challenging to sign the paper copies, and we're in the process of implementing Flowcast, which would take care of that. And we're also discussing using the approval process that's within our general ledger. So they did find that there weren't any problems with any of the entries in the backup and that they were correct. They just want the approval documented for them. And you'll see that in the communications that come through to the board. Next slide. So if anybody has questions and would like to reach out to the engagement team directly, their information is here. Joseph Santapanti and Catherine Pontnod were the main people that did the audit work for us, and they are free to take any questions if you should have it. And before I ask for resolution, is there any more discussion?
Jane, this is Matt. Just a quick question on the adjustments. How do we have to, I'm thinking of the state auditors of public accounts audits. Will those adjustments, if we acknowledge them, do those have to be accounted for with the state auditors, or will that be part of, will that become part of, the state auditor's report? What is the, what happens with those, especially given the first two they passed on?
The state auditors are currently out looking at FY20 and FY21. They will look at our audit reports for FY22, but given the one for the federal funds, given the fact that back in 2012, when we did the reporting, it was accurate for what we knew at that time. It's just hard to look back at 10 years later and say, hey, oh, maybe you should have done it this way. Value of hindsight, and it really was accurate at that time. I don't believe that they will have any problems with that. And then the adjustment having to do with the deferred financing fees it's very small. It doesn't really cause a difference in SL2's ending their income or their equity. So I don't believe we'll have a problem with that. And the fact that it's correct for one type of reporting we do and not correct for the other. So also those are coming down towards the end of their life as well and should be off the balance sheet soon.
All right.
Any other questions?
I had just one comment, which is that, this is John Harity, that given the amount of innovative financing and that we do, and a lot of things that you don't find in the rest of government or in private business, it's really remarkable how you all keep track of it all and have the bottom line come out the way it ought to come out. So I just want to say thank you for an incredible job well done.
You're welcome. And it's thanks to the team. As long as we talk to each other and stay up on what's going on, it gets easier to put things into financial results. So.
Any other questions or comments?
With that, Madam Chair, it's Tom Flynn. I'd like to make a motion that we move this resolution for a vote.
Thank you, Tom. Do I hear a second?
Second, Matt.
Hey, Matt, thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on. So the Audit Compliance and Governance Committee also discussed the proposed impact of methodology updates. And so to discuss those, I think we're going to have Eric Schrago. It's time to hear what you've been dealing with, Eric.
Absolutely. So the ACG committee has oversight of our impact methodologies, and So we most recently have brought to them an update on our jobs and tax revenue generation methodologies. So going back to 2009, our predecessor, the Clean Energy Fund, worked with DECD on a study about how many jobs were created by the clean energy industry in Connecticut. And that study evolved and has had a couple of different iterations. In 2016, that was adapted to the Green Bank. And then in 2020, we did a refresh of it. And basically, the study has evolved to look at how many jobs are created per $1 million that's invested in a particular technology or a particular market segment. So, residential solar or commercial energy efficiency or in anaerobic digesters. It basically gives us a multiplier for each $1 million that is out there. And over the years, we've worked with DECD, the Department of Economic and Community Development, to review the model and to get their blessing on it. Similarly, on the tax side, this builds off the jobs model. This looks at the amount of taxes that are generated per $1 million that was invested in the various technologies. And we did this initially in 2019. And what we're doing right now is basically just refreshing both of those studies. We aren't changing methodology at all. We expanded to include technologies that we had left out previously, so anaerobic digestion being one. When we did the 2016 study, we hadn't completed any ADs, so it was of no need. Now we've done two. We figured, hey, let's add that in. We've included battery storage. We've included EV charging. So we figured it was time to refresh that. That's basic, and we just wanted to kick the tires with both on both of the methodologies. So the committee has reviewed this refresh. DECD reviewed the model, and we have their blessing on that, just to make sure that we're using some kind of tangential modeling as well around induced and indirect job creation. The other big addition here is on the tax methodology. We are now including property tax generation, which is a new thing. In the past, we had only looked at personal and corporate income taxes, as well as sales and use. So this should have a little bit of added benefit, but if you've paid attention or looked at the tax code in Connecticut, there are a lot of exemptions for clean energy in terms of property tax. So can't claim a huge additional benefit. But for the sake of time, are there any questions on this? All right. So with that, Madam Chair, maybe
yes,
you want to see if
absolutely.
there's a motion to.
Hearing no questions or comments, may I have a motion to approve Resolution 6?
I
Tom,
would move Resolution 6. John
It's
Harry.
I'll
John
second
Harity.
it.
Thank you.
Tom Flynn
Thank
seconds it.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. Moving
Awesome.
on.
Thanks.
What? Did somebody have a comment? Okay. Moving on. Let's see. We're going to deal now with investment updates and recommendations. And I think, Eric, that's you again. And then we'll hear from Bert as well and Mariana.
I'm sorry. I think Bert was going to cover this slide.
Okay, so. Bert. I don't think we can hear you.
How about now?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So these updates are for other than our SMARTY program, our CPACE program, and the work that we do with Eversource on Small Business Energy Advantage. Those are being covered elsewhere. in the updates. So we have funding for solar, which is moving along, some 800,000, almost 900,000 for 5 solar MAP projects that were funded in September, and an additional 2.9 million that's coming along as laid out there on this slide. Plus, we have some funding for solar contractors between now and the end of the fiscal year of about an additional 600,000. In addition to this, discussions are coming along with battery storage providers. These are being stoked by the Energy Storage Solutions Incentive Program, as well as some very key changes in the Inflation Reduction Act, which give benefit to standalone battery storage for ITC purposes, investment tax credit purposes, which is 30%. So some very significant changes in federal policy, which we expect will translate not only into battery storage deployment, but also investment needs for green bank capital. Then we have our rolling RFP capital solutions program, where we closed one transaction that was for Posigen. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the slides ahead. And then we have upcoming both 2 in proposal form, Capital for Change, which would represent a capital allocation increase of about $5.5 million, a proposal with Berkshire Bank for Butterfly, which would result in a use of about $5 million additional as well. And then we are in late stage diligence discussions with a company called Agbotic, which is a highly automated organic greenhouse farm developer. We actually did a site visit to their facility up in Sackett's Harbor, New York, upper New York State, and duly impressed by that. And they're in the process of raising additional equity that is going to be required for moving these projects along. So more to come there. And we did engineer a pay down of some of our asset-backed security Shrek bonds, which we'll discuss in the incentive programs update. So that's it for investment updates. Any questions there? Okay.
Bert,
so move.
Bert, this is Lonnie. Just a quick,
Sure.
Involving battery storage. I'm getting a lot of questions as whether those are going to be vulnerable to property taxes, because I know municipalities are looking around for new opportunities. And do we have any clarification on that, battery storage and property taxes?
I'm going to defer to Brian Farnan on that.
Yes, that is a great question and an exciting one, because as of this morning, we are circulating for signatures, and we actually just got signatures for the final 3 towns that we were in litigation with. So we were able to settle all of our cases with all the various towns. This is the wheels of justice move slow, and we did resolve them in a positive way for the Green Bank. So I'm happy to be able to have closed that chapter as it relates to the, for those that aren't aware, there is a property tax exemption for residential solar systems in Connecticut. Some towns were arguing that because with a third party owned system, those weren't owned by the homeowner, those did not fall within that exemption. And they were also making an argument that because some of that energy is sold back to the grid, like through net metering and tariffs, right, when you're not using energy, that was not also for residential use. It only a handful of communities, towns came on board with this lawsuit, about 19, but 19 out of 169 is a lot, and we're glad to have finally resolved it.
So Lonnie, again, just to follow up. So that includes battery storage going forward. I mean, this settlement, I know that I was on the Planning and Development Committee where the municipalities kept coming back because they thought they saw all the solar going in that they wanted to tax. And so
I think they would be hard pressed to make the argument that a battery storage system that is attached to a solar PV system is not included within that exemption. If it was a standalone system, I think that's a different argument. But I think if they're going to make that push, they're likely going to have to do that in front of the legislature, not through the courts.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Brian.
Yes.
Brian, it's Matt. Just one follow-up on with the new NRES model. How do you think that's going to create a problem with that same argument about where the power is used?
I mean, I don't know how this, I mean, the amount of legal fees that were involved in this dispute for what where those towns ended up, I would like to think that they're not going to try to do this again. I mean, you really had a couple activist towns and, you know, one attorney who really kind of led the charge in organizing this. And I don't know if they would have the same appetite to go there again. I mean, this is, you know, this is municipal tax dollars being, in my humble opinion, being wasted in these lawsuits. And the only one that was really benefiting was their attorneys. So they could, but I don't think they would. But
I'm hearing it is cropping up in both the front of the meter status of the buy-all tariff projects, and now that there's the ability to oversize systems to maximize roofs. So I think it's a good question, Matt, and one I've just started to hear things about, and one we need to watch closely.
I have an update regarding that. In Public Act 2214, OPM was charged with reviewing the current statutory framework as it relates to real property and personal property on commercial solar at 50 kilowatts and above, and then propose a new framework going forward due to the confusion in both the tax code and the rapid changes that have occurred for solar systems, whether it's on-site, off-site restrictions and things like that. So I have a little working group formed of assessors, towns, and the solar industry trying to work through that.
Joanna, this is Matt. You said that's for 50 kW and up?
Yeah, I'm not sure how they came to that number because it doesn't seem to have, it doesn't come from like an instigating thing from a certain level, but yes, 50K.
Are the members appointed, or is it just sort of a working group? In other words, could the Green Bank get a seat at that table?
It's a really informal working group, and I don't think we'll be proposing any particular legislation, but I think the framework will just be some sort of like guardrails for the legislature to consider as they move forward. But I'm happy to take any thoughts, especially via email or one-on-one meetings and things like that. I'd love to hear your feedback.
Sure.
I have another question on the storage program. If we're done with that one, it's Vicki.
Okay, Vicki, go.
Thank you. So with the IRA incentives, it was good to hear that we have a lot more interest because of those. How is the Green Bank re-looking at the cost benefit test at PURA and the amount of the incentive for the storage program that is collected from ratepayers? Because to the extent this provides, you know, a new level of incentive, I would think that would impact the cost benefit calculation and perhaps provide the ability to reduce the amount contributed by ratepayers.
Yes, let me take a stab at that, Commissioner. This is Brian Garcia. So there are a number of different adders in the Inflation Reduction Act for clean energy. For example, low income adders, prevailing wage adders, apprenticeship adders, a number of different ways of being able to increase the investment tax credit. Our team is very actively involved now in dissecting, what is it, Brian, like maybe 25 pieces or 25 different parts of the tax code to think about how they apply to Connecticut. provide comments into Treasury about how they should consider looking at various elements of it. So all of that is to come. I think I heard yesterday that it's likely we're going to see those decisions made a while out, 12 to 24 months. These aren't immediate things that are going to be decided on or clarity is going to be provided. Now, having said that, in the context of the benefit cost analyses at Pura, I think what we would do is look at the likelihood, or we just develop the model to allow us to run sensitivities around those adders to see what the participant cost test looks like. This is one of the 5 benefit cost analyses that deals with the participant economics. So we would look to see how they would benefit. Obviously, we would really focus in on the low income and disadvantaged communities element of the Energy Storage Solutions Program, because we want to bring more federal benefits in. And in fact, we're going to get a little taste of that with one of the investments that Bert's going to talk about in a second. So to the extent we can realize those federal tax credits for Connecticut, great. It will allow us to take a look at the DAs in Connecticut, which will then allow us to make recommendations on what incentive levels should be set or recommended to Pura.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah. When do the tax credits go into place?
Bert or Brian, you want to take that?
The standalone credit for battery storage goes into place January 1.
Right. So I guess I am concerned, I understand the need to look into further nuances as they develop and guidance and so forth. But I do think that, given the high cost of electricity right now, we should be, sort of digging in within the Pura docket, perhaps, on avoiding free ridership, we'll say. I think it makes sense to look at the participant test and then how that impacts the overall cost benefit and whether we can make some reductions or should make some reductions to the ratepayer contribution.
We just had a technical meeting at Pura this week, and I'm pretty sure we modeled in, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure we modeled in the standalone ITC at 30% to look at the participant cost test. Overall, the ratepayer impact measure, which is how ratepayers are impacted from programs like this, Pura's target is greater than 1.4, which essentially means if you have a benefit of 1.4 greater than the cost, then ratepayer rates are going down. And in the context of energy storage solutions, that's where we are. The thought or the theory is during peak periods of time, during the summer or winter time when our grid is stressed, that the utilities will be able to call on those batteries to reduce peak demand on all ratepayers. And that's the fundamental basis of the program, so that everyone benefits.
Yes, fully understand and support that basis for the program. But if there is an opportunity to reduce the ratepayer incentives, because now there's a new incentive, and I think what we're seeing is a lot more interest in the program as a result of the federal incentives, just from a free ridership perspective, I think it's, the responsible thing to do to look at whether we can reduce that ratepayer contribution. So, if we can do that and still meet all the goals of the program, I think that's a win-win, right? So, we will take a look at the Pura docket, but, from a board member perspective, I think that's something that I'm looking at from the perspective of that role as well.
Hey, Vicki, this is Matt. If I could just comment, I don't know about all that and the level of sophistication that you do, but it sounds a little familiar to discussions we've had in the past with other programs. And I guess the only other factor I would say I would like to hear in that discussion is, we want to maximize the number of projects. We don't want to over-incent projects. I agree, especially at ratepayer expense, but we also do want to maximize the amount of participation to benefit from the federal incentives. So I agree, and I don't know how to balance all that, but we definitely want to get people into this space, and if the federal incentives accelerate that, that should be considered as long as it's neutral or a reduction on ratepayers?
I agree in theory, but I think we have goals in the program that we were already, I think, doing pretty well in meetings. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at all of the angles of this and that we're making sure that we're not accelerating at a faster rate than what the goals of the program are. Happy to have to hear that the incentives are helping boost participation. My understanding was participation was already pretty robust. So free ridership is something that we look at a lot in the context of the energy efficiency programs to make sure we're not over incentivizing. And I think that's the type of thing that we should be looking at here as well. Certainly we want to boost the programs. We want the program to be successful. But if the program was already successful and now we're getting increased demand, I do think it makes sense from a fiscal responsibility perspective to make sure that we're not over incentivizing.
Great, thank you for that feedback, Ed. Be prepared when we get to the update section to speak to the residential and non-residential components. Cool, thank you for that.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Madam Chair, we have a lot. We have a lot of PowerPoint.
I'm looking at this.
Real
I'm
estate.
looking at this.
We have a lot of PowerPoint real estate to get through. I am going to try to be expedient moving through this. So if anyone has any questions, blurt out to stop, and we'll pause and take questions. Does that sound like a workable plan?
That sure does. Let's go for it.
Okay, let's go. All right. The Groton fuel cell. Yeah, this is a project strategic importance to the nuclear sub base in New London. This fuel cell is going to provide about 40% of base requirements when things shift into microgrid mode. And that's moving along as planned. The microgrid part of it should be coming together, finalizing next year. And in fact, I believe it's substantially complete at this stage, but some finishing touches. The fuel cell has gone through commissioning. There were some issues that have been identified over the months. This summer, when it went to full power for a prolonged period of time, an additional item was identified as being problematic. That's going to require the fuel cell run at a reduced level of operation. This is all public information, as was expressed to you in the memo to the board. As disclosed, they are public companies, so these things this information has to be handled in an appropriate way through SEC channels of reporting. So it's going to operate at about 6 megawatts versus 7.4 megawatts, which is the rating on the fuel cells. Full repairs will be made later in 2023 to get it back up to 7.4 megawatts, so that the banks are working with FCE to see what changes might be necessary on the loan package. We expect that to be done by the end of the year. The current extension runs out at the end of this month, so we're asking for another couple of months to get that done. Hopefully won't need another extension, but I certainly can't promise that, but hopefully we won't. So that brings us, unless there are any questions, that brings us to the resolutions, which you can put on the next slide. Next slide. Not sure who's driving. There we go. Okay. And that carries us through to December 31, 2022. Madam Chair, back to you for getting a person or getting this on the table for a vote.
Okay. This is Lonnie again. So are there any questions or observations before I call for a motion to approve Resolution 7? Oh, hearing none. Okay, do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 7?
So moved.
Oh, Adrienne, thank you.
Yes.
Do I hear a second?
Second, John Harity.
Thank you, John. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Lonnie, this is Matt. I'm going to abstain because of, as I've said prior, we've worked on this project at my law firm.
Okay, doke. Anybody else abstaining?
I'm going to abstain as well. It's Vicky.
Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm saying, okay, good, good. All right. So that's it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. On to the next. This is an investment that was brought, if we can go to the next slide. Investment that was brought to you previously, Posigen combined with Generac battery systems to bring solar and storage for all throughout low and moderate income families throughout Connecticut. This is under the Energy Storage Solutions program that this was approved. Can we go to the next slide, please? And just for those who aren't terribly familiar, but you know, the energy storage solution, we just had a robust conversation about this. It's got incentives that run over until the end of the decade for residential and C&I systems. Ed will cover this in a little bit of his report out. So next slide, please. The key for us in this program is to serve vulnerable communities and low-income families as well, and that's what this does by pairing the deployment capacity of Posigen, which has a focus on these communities, with the batteries that are being supplied by Generac. We're trying to achieve is some low lease rates into these communities for these battery systems. Next slide, please. And that's made possible not only by the incentives, which you see here, which are enhanced for low income and underserved communities, but also by some preferential concessionary pricing that we've made available under what was approved by the board. Next slide, please. And also, this has been enhanced by the improvements in federal policy, as was previously mentioned, to get investment tax credit for standalone battery storage systems, so that these don't necessarily have to be paired with solar, as well as the fact that there was some concern by the investment community that even if solar battery storage systems were paired with solar, if the solar had been put in previously and some time had expired between when the solar was put in and when the batteries came in, and if it was longer than, say, 6 months or a year, it could call into question whether the investor could take the investment tax credit on the battery storage system. With the change in federal policy as of January 1, that concern goes off the table and to the benefit of this program. Next slide. So what this is basically, just to summarize what was done back in April, the customer will have a monthly lease payment. We are hoping to get as close to insignificant as possible. We think that is potentially possible with the adders that Brian Garcia was mentioning earlier in the meeting about for low income and energy communities and apprenticeship and domestic content and all kinds of other adders that are involved. We also have the Generac guarantees that are really kind of backstopping this. The guarantees are related to the incentive payments that are coming from the utilities. Those payments are being paid over to Generac as the system operator, and Generac is then passing those funds over to Posigen once a year, and we have a lock on those funds that are coming in. They're going to be coming in once a year. Previously, it was twice a year, but because the incentive that's coming out in the winter period is so small, it was decided by the parties to make the transfer of payment once a year. Next slide. So this is unchanged. I'm not going to go through all the details of the working capital line, except that it is secured by the the battery systems and equipment, as well as the contracts that will be in place until they are moved to the contracts with the homeowners that will be in place until those are moved to the term facility, which is also part of this package. So that was actually closed at the end of September, and there was a $2 million draw against invoiced amounts from Generac for batteries and related system equipment. Next slide, please. So under the term loan facility, so once that equipment is converted into completed systems and it becomes eligible for financing under the term portion of the facility, the $6 million term loan facility, then we have to apply an interest rate to that. We had an incentive rate of 4% versus the 5% that would apply for non-LMI distressed community portions, but that has now been reduced to 2% in discussions with the company in order to achieve a super low lease rate of not more than $10 per month for the battery systems, and we think that that's going to actually get down lower than that with some of the benefits that were mentioned of the various adders in federal policy. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the resolutions, and would love to have a motion on the table, and then we'll take some discussion after it's on the table, if that's okay. Thank you.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved, Sarah Sanders.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. And any second?
I'm fine.
Tom is seconding?
Yep.
Great. Okay, discussion.
I just want
Questions?
to say, sorry, it's Vicki. Thank you for this update. It's an exciting program. We have a lot going on with the influx of federal funding, and we're focusing very much at deep on comprehensive building energy retrofits. And I think it would be good to coordinate on between this program and some of the other programs that we're looking at, and seeing if there are other things that we can leverage within this program or partner with. So just want to throw that out there.
Yes, and we've actually started those conversations with your team, Vicki, and we call it over at the Green Bank the incentive maze that that federal policy has thrown our way.
Yes.
So you combine that with the incentives from the utilities and everything that we have going on with energy storage solutions and so forth, and we just have quite a stew of possibilities in terms of how we can enhance deployment in the state. And so we have to take full advantage of getting to the I call it the hockey stick moment, where we can really blow the doors off of deployment. So yes, absolutely. We need to not only coordinate on that, but we have to educate. We have to educate the contractors so that they don't do the same thing for the next 5 years that they've done for the last 5 years, because we've got a radically changed context here. You know, we've got tremendous policy benefits, but we also have possibly some policy barriers and regulatory barriers. Maybe there's some tariff issues. So we really have to examine the entire playing field between what we have in place right now, what federal policy is doing, and how we can take full advantage of it's $370 million of benefits for climate in that Inflation Reduction Act. So Connecticut wants to take full advantage of it. Totally agree.
Absolutely, Bert. And our teams have been doing great work together so far. I think, you know, we have all these kind of programs that have grown up separately, and now is really just the tremendous opportunity to knit them all together. And we are doing a lot of work on this in our comprehensive energy strategy that I know you have been participating in, and also within the context of the CLM program and the weatherization assistance program. So a lot more to come here, but just for everybody's benefit, there is really tremendous opportunity here to have, co-delivery of programs and the opportunity for people to really be strategic about how they're implementing these programs in their homes and businesses.
And
Bert,
mobility.
So Bert, it's Tom Flynn. How are you?
Good morning. Morning, Tom.
Good. So I've got a question here that I'm just trying to wrap my arms around. Based on something you said, and maybe I misunderstood it, and I apologize if I did. You had said originally the interest rate was on these were something like 4%. We were going to agree to 4%, and then we lowered it to 2%.
Yes, it's agreed pending board approval.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So
Yeah,
that's what you're asking for. So who was it agreed to with? Explain it to me a little bit. I'm because we're in a rising interest rate environment, and 4% at this rate is a bargain. And you're telling me to go to 2% when everybody else is going in the opposite direction, which means it's costing our organization / the taxpayer more money, right? Because we're leaving money on the table. So I understand we're trying to get the deployment. I get it, but I need a compelling argument to say that we're not going to even get that deployment when it's at 4% versus the 2%.
The compelling argument, Tom, is this is focused on LMI and distressed communities only, and for that particular benefit, they have to actually disclose to us the pricing that they are doing on these particular battery storage systems, the lease rates. So we're going to have oversight into that. We specifically engaged in pricing discussions, with them, and this is going to.
With who?
Yeah.
Who's them?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. With Posigen. They provide the battery leases. They do the deployment. They do the installation, and they enter into the lease agreement with the LMI family. So that's who we were talking about here. So basically, by going from 4% to 2%, we're able to get between the IRA and pushing them on their margins, we're able to get half of the way there, and we wanted to get the full way there. So we said, well, look, we'll lower below $10 or below per month.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we were starting at around 20.
So is Posigen putting money into this too? Yeah, is Posigen taking it? So they're lowering their fee too, or whatever they get paid on this?
Yeah, they're correct. So they're combining what they get, reduction what they're getting. They're also going to get some benefits from the IRA, provisions of the IRA, and then from the interest rate. So it's a combination that enables us to get at $10 or less.
Yeah. So based on
and we're going to be pushing them for a lot less.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Based on that kind of thought pattern and your projections on this, that 2% reduction in interest rate is worth what amount? What's that quote unquote costing, or giving? What are we leaving on the table?
Oh, good. Well, good question. Just in terms of dollars, that's $120,000 a year.
$120,000 a year
when it's fully deployed. Mm-hmm.
How many years do we think? I mean, what's the?
That's maximum. That's maximum, because that would assume that 100% of the facility was LMI. So that's the maximum extent. So if we maybe I think they deploy 2/3 to their LMI community and 1/3 to the non-LMI. So let's call it rough numbers, $80,000 once fully deployed. And then, then you've got to take the average balance. So 600, call it maybe $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's off the top of my head, Tom. I'm sorry.
I know
it's a very good question, but I'm using rough numbers here of the 80,000 and a 6-year average life and fully deployed.
No, Bert, I understand.
So it shouldn't be any more than that.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Have the potential communities been identified and contacted, or is this just a really initial step?
We have there are certain communities that Posigen is already in, and many of those are LMI and distressed communities. They started in Bridgeport, which is where a bulk of their deployment is already. So their strategy is to hit their initial communities where they've already deployed to low income first and say, okay, you've got solar, we want to add this battery storage system for a few bucks a month, and these are the benefits it'll give you, in terms of an outage, you'll be protected, and depending upon how the system can be used interactively with solar, maybe give some benefit for using more solar and stored energy on a daily basis to improve the value proposition for the homeowner. So that's where they're going to start first, in those communities.
Thank you.
We have a long-term relationship with Posigen too. That's been productive. Correct, Bert?
Oh yes, this is on top of our existing facilities that we have with Posigen that have been ongoing since 2015.
Okay. Any more questions or concerns?
With a lot of success.
Any more questions or concerns? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
I was an aye. It's Vicky. I couldn't unmute fast enough.
Oh, great. Thanks, Vicky. Opposed? Abstentions? All right. Moving on.
Okay, moving on. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a program we have with Capital for Change. 3 years ago, we set up this program to finance energy efficiency loans for Capital for Change under a flexible revolving credit facility. So as they booked more transactions, the facility funding would grow, and as transactions maybe back down, volume back down, as it did during COVID. So this was well timed for Capital for Change, because this went into place in December of 2019, and as we all know, COVID hit in 2020 when that stalled the installs and stalled their funding program. So they were able to flexibly use our facility, writing that down and then writing it back up in late 2020 and into 2021. So if you go to the next page, that facility is based on the prime rate, and you'll see that when the facility was closed, prime was at 4.75. As a result of COVID and Federal Reserve policy, prime rate fell off a cliff and down to 3.25%. You now see that we're stair-stepping up quite rapidly, and we're now at levels that far exceed where we were when we closed the transaction back in December of 2019. That's based on the current rise in interest rates. That 6.25 is going to be almost assuredly 7% the first week of November when the Fed meets again. They will meet again in December, and odds are for at least another 0.5%, if not 0.75%. So we could very quickly see the prime rate at 8% or even higher, which, aside from capital for change, is going to have a massive impact on small business, because small business tends to borrow against the prime rate, plus perhaps a spread over that prime rate. So look for that stress coming to your community soon. So what we're trying to do here is to change this facility. We actually approached Amalgamated Bank and Green Bank, approached Capital for Change during the summer, midsummer, to say, look, there's a hurricane coming. Let's get prepared for it. The facility is up at the end of December of this year. Let's look at what we can do to fix the pricing. As a result of those conversations, Amalgamated said that they could do a 6% fixed rate. We're putting on the table a 4% fixed rate, as well as increasing our share of the facility to 40% from 16.7%. And Amalgamated agreed to move their participation down to help with the interest rate, which would, on balance, if this goes into effect, would be an average of 5.2% on a rolling forward basis. So that's what we have on deck here for the resolutions, which are on the next page. And I'd like to get a motion and a second here so that we can then move to discussion.
Okay, do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 9?
So move, John Harity.
Thank you, John. A second?
This is Dominic. I'll second.
Thanks, Dominic. Okay, so discussion. Anybody want to weigh in?
I didn't mention during the presentation, but Capital for Change is not only our largest Smart E lender in the state. More than half the loans are done by, or approximately half the loans are done by Capital for Change. But they also, as a community development financial institution, focus on low and moderate income families, and by requirement with the U.S. Treasury, at least 60% of their business has to be focused on those communities. So this is a great benefit for those communities that they serve.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, moving on.
Okay, thank you very much. And continuing to move through the real estate here, this is another transaction that the board previously approved, or at least a credit that the board previously approved in April. This was related to, that approval was related to a recapitalization of Butterfly to bring in new equity. So we were giving them a little more equity, term debt to give them flexibility to undertake conversations with various equity proposals. And those recapitalization discussions were successful, as we'll talk about here today. What also came into clearer focus as we have been continuing our ongoing discussions with the company, which started back in 2019, we at that time articulated a vision for an efficient capital structure for the company, which is now taking shape with a solid equity base and with facilities from banks that we'll discuss on the next couple of slides. So next slide, please. Just quickly a recap for the benefit of new members of the board. Butterfly is an energy efficiency as a service company. So what they do is they take on the full burden of putting in the equipment at no cost to these small businesses, a lot of chain quick serve restaurants, as you'll see in a next slide or two. They take over the relationship with the utility, so they become the counterpart to the utility. They collect in advance from the business, and what that does is that sets up a savings that they're able to guarantee to the customer, and that is done for a 10-year period of time, and that's on the basis of quantity of energy used, not the price that's paid to the utility. So there's no pricing risk vis-a-vis the utility. This is all on the basis of savings of energy consumption. So that's the benefit that Butterfly brings to the customers in these relationships. So these small businesses, which are, we just talked about the prime rate, they're not going to be borrowing at 8% doing energy efficiency. They're going to be using all that capital for their business. So there's no cash out the door, but they get the energy savings that result from these investments. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit on the history. I'm not going to go through this in detail, except to say that about 15% of the revenue streams of the company is from Connecticut sources, but 2/3 of their jobs are Connecticut sourced. And I think that's related in, if we go to the next slide, that's just their dashboard. This is what the owner of the restaurant can see, how their energy use has been coming down over time and the benefits they're going to see over time. Next slide, please. But what I wanted to get to was related to those jobs. DECD has some financing, currently $1.7 or $1.8 million that has some forgiveness related to it if job creation targets are met. We think they will definitely meet those targets. And there's also some financing from Connecticut Innovations, as well as Mizzen Capital, which is a woman-owned enterprise, small business investment corporation that has invested $5 million in junior debt. Butterfly is 100% current on the financing that we closed at the end of May. The interest rate is 9%. 50% is roughly 50%, but to a minimum of 5.5% is paid in cash, with the balance being in kind and capitalized into the facility, and that's for the first year. They are 100% current on their payments, and as a result of the recapitalization that we'll talk about on the next slide, we exercised 50% of the warrants we got as a result of negotiations with them, and we're holding half for some potential upside, which we think will be there in the years ahead. So nice chunk of change we got there. So as far as the recap, Partners Group, they acquired a controlling stake in Butterfly on July 1 of this year. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that this garnered some very big attention. Bloomberg and other outlets talking about how they are getting into this, putting $500 million worth of capital available for the company. If you go to the next slide, and this is already starting to produce results in terms of record growth in 2022, and they're in 49 states and more than 3,000 customer sites as we speak today. So really good progress for the company. Next slide, please. So this is where Butterfly stands right now. They are financing all of the CapEx and labor requirements of the installs to their to their customer base, which is in the lower left-hand corner. Some very impressive names there, which we explained in the April meeting. And so that's just being financed 100% with equity cash that's from the partners group, which you see in the lower right-hand corner, which is providing substantial funding for the company. Next slide, please. But as we've discussed, there's a more efficient way and less expensive way of financing this capital expansion and business model of Butterfly. It's to use a traditional lower cost commercial bank funding rather than private equity funding. At the same time, the repayment cycle is atypical. So this is going to be repaid via term loan advances with a term facility that is also being put in place. All of this is being structured by the Green Bank with the bank participants. Berkshire Bank stepped forward and said that they felt that they would be able to consider a working capital facility. So they have given us the broad outlines of how that would work with Green Bank participation. We will get into that a little bit later. Next slide, please. And here's the term loan facility that is being structured with a club of senior lenders and together with a junior facility that's being organized also by the Green Bank that would interplay with this working capital facility. We expect that this would be in place by January, February of 2023. Next slide. This is the structure for the $100 million loan. We don't need to go into this. You can review this at your leisure. Next slide, please. The strategic partner here is Berkshire Bank. They're a $12 billion balance sheet bank with a footprint that extends principally in Massachusetts and into Connecticut and Rhode Island and even southern Vermont. So next slide, please. And here's the outline of the working capital facility, which would be a total amount of $20 million led by Berkshire Bank, and the Green Bank would participate in a 25% pro rata and pari passu, meaning equivalent share of cash flow, except in a default or term out situation, meaning if there is a term loan takeout failure, meaning the term loan does not come to fruition or there are other defaults, then the senior lender would get 100% of the cash until they're paid out, and then we would get the remaining cash flow to pay us out. I would like to indicate that this Berkshire Bank relationship was formed starting back in 2019 with a senior executive of Webster Bank who moved into a senior executive relationship at Berkshire Bank, and he reached out to me when they saw that the success of the $5 million facility with the Green Bank, and he said that they wanted to work with us on some additional financing for Butterfly, and that's the kind of how we got to this place. Next slide. Next slide. And that brings us to the resolution, which is for in principle authorization to enter into negotiations to document a co-investment with Berkshire Bank on a facility for Butterfly. This is subject to full board approval, which we would anticipate being at the December meeting, but we didn't want to go forward with negotiations with the various parties without at least in principle approval to move this forward, and recognizing that this would require not only our board's approval, but it would require approval of the credit committee of Berkshire Bank. So, things would have to go through the governance process of the two organizations, and it would have to be acceptable to Butterfly as well. So that is the resolution. I would appreciate a motion and a second so that we can have any discussion.
Do I hear a motion? Oh, dog is very happy about it.
You have one.
That's my dog reminding me that I have to abstain from this because Butterfly is a client, not on this deal, but on other matters.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
I'll move for acceptance. Adrian speaking.
Okay, great. A second?
Second, Binu Chandy.
Oh, thank you, Banu. And all in favor?
Aye. Oh, wait a minute. Discussion.
Discussion.
Oh, discussion?
should provide
More
any
discussion? Do we have any more discussion? Not hearing any. And I should also say we're going to lose at least 4 board members with a hard stop at 11. So we should move along. So where were we? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Opposed? And Matt's abstaining. Any other abstentions? All right. Moving on.
Okay, this will be the last one. We'll dispense with the update. You can just look at the slide on any updates we had in there. But this is the Canton Hydro project. The issue here is it is complete. Nice picture there of the dam. We are providing subordinated loan as well as a $500,000 guarantee. It is complete, and final completion sign off is expected later this month. And we'll have a ribbon cutting exercise next spring. Next slide, please. And sorry, Mariana, I'm kind of driving this for right now. I'll shift to you for questions if needed. So what's happening is due to some change of ownership, the SBA loan is being considered to be taken over by Inclusive Prosperity Capital, our spin-out organization with a 20-year facility. And so since there is a change in the senior lender, our current guarantee goes to the SBA loan as well as Provident Bank. And since IPC would be slotted into the SBA position, we want approval to be able to apply the same level of guarantee benefits, which we can discuss, but it's really just shifting out lenders and not changing any of our risk criteria or parameters in this transaction whatsoever, as an accommodation to the sponsor of the facility, the sponsor equity owner. That's what's going on here. Next slide, please. Here's our resolution. Would appreciate a motion and a second for any discussion. Thank you.
May I have a motion?
Matt, so moved.
Thank you, Matt. Second?
Second, Binu.
Okay. Thank you, Banu. With a third by John. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
I need to abstain on this one as well, please. Thanks.
Okay. Who was?
It's
Say again.
Vicky.
Who? Oh,
That was Vicky.
Thanks, Vicky. Okay. Any more abstentions? Okay.
Hey, Lonnie, just a quick comment. This is a great example of a project that kicked around for really decades, and the Green Bank, solved it, where before the Green Bank existed, it never got solved. So congratulations to everybody who worked on it.
Now, I remember when I chaired the Energy Committee, this came up every year, and there were out-of-state organizations coming in who wanted to take control of it, and and they all died.
Well, speaking of things that have been kicking around for years, look at that Cargill. We are nearing completion, and that's just the street that had been torn up. Eversource put in the gas line, relocated the gas line. We got the flows, the tunnels all repaired and everything else. We're sailing into completion on that project. Thank God. Okay, that's the update. Moving on.
Okay, so
financing programs. There you go, Madam Chair.
Okay, we're at financing programs. So is that Mackie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I believe we're going to skip the update. The materials are available in your package, and if we have time at the end, I can give it, but we're going to go right to the financing programs item that requires a vote. You'll recall at our July meeting, we brought forward a proposal or a draft proposal to the CPACE program guidelines to incorporate EV chargers as a standalone measure into them. In the last legislative session, the CPACE statute was revised to include this, so we needed to to bring the program guidelines in line with the updated statute. So in short, we added EV chargers as a standalone measure and exempted them from the savings to investment ratio requirement, which were the two sort of key details from the statute. There were some other more minor changes to the guidelines. Some just edited for clarity. The other one was simplifying the third-party capital provider application process and really brought it in line with how we actually do things. So these were presented to you in July prior to taking them to the required public comment process. We ran that public comment process and did not receive any comments, so we're bringing them back to you for approval in the exactly as they look back in July when we brought them to you. Next slide, I believe, is the resolution to approve them. Yes. I'll turn it back to you, Chair Reed, for the.
Thank you. Thank you. So do I hear a motion, and then we'll have discussion? Do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 12?
So moved, Matt.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Do I hear a second?
Second, John Harity.
Thank you, John. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, excellent. So now we have time, I think, and anybody who needs to leave obviously is not going to be held, to talk about the updates on incentive programs and recommendations and that kind of thing. And I think so. I don't know. We want to return to Mackie, and then we have Ed, Bert, Sarah.
I think if it's okay, Madam Chair, what we'll do is we've got the updates on the incentive and financing programs in the memos in the meeting materials.
Okay.
I think it'd be useful for Sarah Pine to talk about our SHREC ABS and how we're doing there in terms of generating our SHRECs, and then Bert will talk about how we resolved the bond issue from last July. So that they're important items.
Okay, so first, Sarah. Sarah, may we hear from you?
Perfect.
Thank you. All right. Okay, perfect. All right. Q1 of 2022 experienced the first round of several 3G cellular service disconnects in the state, which impacted our REC production meters, and thus began our journey with Ken Gillingham for the next 5 years in order to use his REC estimation methodology, which was approved for use by NEPOOL beginning in Q1 of 2022 for all meters in the RCIP program due to the 3G cellular shutdown. The metered production in this first quarter was around 87.6% of the budget, and Ken Gillingham's first round of estimations added 4.3% of the total production. Just overall, we ended up about 8.5% under budget. Next slide, please. From a revenue perspective, Q1 ended up $215,000 under budget, with tranches 1 and 2 being affected the most, given that they're older and they have a larger percent of 3G meters. Next slide, please. Q2 has just been submitted to the EDCs for review. In terms of SHRECs for Q2, about 99,000 RECs have been created, which is estimated to result in about $4.3 million. Next slide, please. Ken Gillingham in Q2 helped to create around 13,000 RECs for use, on Shrek submissions using his NEPOOL approved methodology. In this quarter, weather also played an important role and added about 6,000 recs. We're experiencing a favorable weather in this quarter and is about 7% better than expected. We look forward to working with Ken through our 3G meter upgrade program, as well as third-party system owners during their 3G meter upgrades. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. All right, Bert, you're up.
All right. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah, for that. And yes, we really appreciate all the estimates that that Ken Gillingham has been doing for us in terms of dealing with some of the missing information there. So, as you recall, the board gave us approval to deal with the ABS bonds because, as you see in the report that's kind of hidden there, but at the bottom of the slide, it said that the bond rating service was maintaining a watch developing status, which is very ominous, which means they're looking at a downgrade of the bonds. That was going to be really disastrous for our bondholder and not very good for our reputation in the market. So we worked with the bondholder to negotiate on a prepayment of some of the bonds that did not involve a prepayment penalty. So we were able to get rid of that. So no penalty to us. We made a prepayment on the bonds, which enabled us to enhance the debt service coverage. And lo and behold, the bond rating service came along and immediately reaffirmed the ratings at A- and BBB-, as you see there. So that keeps it in investment grade status, which we are all very pleased with. And so thanks very much to the board for enabling this restructuring, and we're moving on. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Good. So just kind of cruising through here to the end, just some quick updates from the environmental infrastructure perspective. We did leave in your board materials the primers for land conservation, parks and recreation, and agriculture. As we talked a little bit about in July, Ashley Stewart and I had spent the prior 9 months talking to a number of stakeholders to understand what they were working on in these various areas. What were the public policies? What were the targets? What were the incentives? These primers, for anyone who's kind of interested in what Connecticut is doing, will give you probably 85% of what's happening in the market. I think they're a really good ground resource to give you a sense as to what's happening in Connecticut. So take a look when you can. Ashley and I are going to plug away at completing 2 more. One has to do with ecosystem services and carbon offsets, and then the other one is water. So by the end of this calendar year, we hope to have those primers done and to you and posted. These documents are also online as well. In terms of our targets for this year for environmental infrastructure, these are from our comprehensive plan. As I noted, we hired Ashley Stewart as our manager of community engagement. She's been great. We are currently in a search process for our director of environmental infrastructure, trying to find our needle in a haystack. We're making steady progress on that. We are continuing engagement in water, as I was noting, wrapping up that primer. In terms of waste and recycling, one of the things I'm thinking about, because it applies to raising resources, is with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, I really feel like I need to turn my attention away from the, continuing to assess waste and recycling and focus in on bringing the federal funds to Connecticut. So I'm going to put waste and recycling on the shelf for now so that I can focus in on what needs to get done. We'll talk about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund in a second. That will be the source of funding to help enable us to make investments in environmental infrastructure, but just wanted to flag that. We are working on launching new products. Mackie and his team are working on including resilience within CPACE. It is our expectation on the Smart E-Loan that we will be bringing resilience measures to the deployment committee in November for consideration. So we're still making steady progress on our existing line of products and expanding them out. And then along the way, there are research opportunities that we conduct to support steady progress in these areas. That's a quick update on environmental infrastructure, and I think we just have other business, Lonnie. Maybe if we wanted to wrap this up, I can tie this up.
Can I ask a quick question? This is Sarah Sanders. I was just reading an article about MIRR, the Material Innovation Recovery Authority, letting go of all its top executives, which is not a surprise given the closure of the Hartford plant. But I see you mentioned waste and recycling, and I know Bert's on their board. Maybe at a future meeting you could talk about, to what extent those activities are impacting the Green Bank and the role of the Green Bank and so forth. Cool. Maybe not now, obviously, but maybe at a future meeting. I'm just curious to what extent.
Great.
That impacts. Yep. No, yeah, that's very good input, because the reality is the municipalities are freaking out about this. I mean, this is the future of where waste goes is huge, and of course, Bert being on that committee now, that'd be important input.
Yep. So perhaps related to that a little bit. So along the way, as we're all navigating the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and now the Inflation Reduction Act, we've been very actively involved in providing comments to a number of different entities. So one was the Community Reinvestment Act is coming up for reauthorization, or they're looking to change the regulations. So the Office of the Comptroller, the Currency, the FDIC, and the Federal Reserve sought public comments, and we provided public comments into there along with Commissioner Perez of the Department of Banking and his team to really stress the importance of less than 80% area median income Community Reinvestment Act communities to be eligible for climate-related, green economy-related activities. Our focus here is to encourage, exactly what we've been talking about here today. For example, the Berkshire banks and all these commercial banks to be investing in less than 80% AMI, area median income census tracts with a focus on green economy types of investments. So we put that those comments in our board packet. And then while we were talking on waste there, Sarah, we also, as the co-administrators with the utilities of the Energy Storage Solutions Program, submitted public comments into the Department of Energy on battery storage recycling. Adrian, we're going to need to lean on your guidance and expertise here. I think, batteries offer a lot of benefits to participants and ratepayers from an energy perspective and a resiliency perspective. But at the end of life, they present a challenge in terms of managing the materials. So we raised that, just providing the DOE what's happening in Connecticut, but we need help and guidance and financial assistance from the federal government to help us think about how we manage waste and recycling. So we worked with DEEP's pollution prevention arm to help us navigate those comments. So that's all to say that we're actively involved in the federal process of programs and competing for federal funds. Which brings us to the Inflation Reduction Act, and specifically the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. For those of you who recall, the Connecticut Green Bank was founded through Section 99 of Public Act 1180 back in June of 2011. But the actual proponent of the concept of the Green Bank was Reed Hunt, a former board member of the Connecticut Green Bank, the executive director of the Coalition for Green Capital. When that policy he was working on at the federal level in 2009, the American Clean Energy and Securities Act didn't pass. That act would have created something called the Clean Energy Deployment Administration, a national climate bank. He turned his efforts to the state of Connecticut, working with Governor Malloy, Commissioner Esty, and the legislative leaders, Lonnie and Laura, right there in the E&T committee to effectively create the nation's first green bank. So we've been at this for more than a decade. And lo and behold, Congresswoman Dingell stepped in to the fray several years ago, leading the charge on the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator, a national climate bank. And then the former Congressman, now Senators Markey and Van Hollen, came forward. And with the agreement that was reached underneath the Inflation Reduction Act, we now have a $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund. So it feels like the whole thesis that Reed Hunt was after, more than 10 years ago, has come to fruition in the passage of this portion of the act. So our team is now very focused in on trying to realize those funds back to Connecticut to help support us in the achievement of the policies. There's really two aspects of the fund. One is the Senator Sanders Zero Emission Technologies portion, which is focused on low-income and disadvantaged communities. His staff reached out to us about a year and a half ago. They were very interested in what we were doing on solar and how we were able to get more low to moderate income families into solar. So this part of the act focuses in and actually gives an example of rooftop solar for low income families. So $7 billion of grants, lots of competition is going to happen here. And then the remaining $20 billion you see there for general assistance and low income and disadvantaged communities. That $20 billion is also called the National Climate Bank. That is what Dingell, Markey, and Van Hollen were after as a component of the fund. So we're working, Bert and Eric are leading efforts on creating a big green tent here. I'm working with the governor's office and Commissioner Dykes on the zero emission technologies piece here to try to obviously maximize these resources back to the state of Connecticut. But let me turn it, there was a recent conversation, maybe Lonnie, I don't know if you want to talk about your conversation with Senator Murphy, and I would just say that over this period of time from 2011, since our creation to to today, Senator Murphy's been a huge proponent. There are probably 5 or 6 national green bank bills that he was working on in Congress. So here he is with our leadership here having a conversation about it recently. And I'll turn it to you, Lonnie or Bert, if you want to say anything there.
This is Lonnie. I mean, I think everybody knows that Senator Murphy is he's very adept at really getting into these things, and he is a huge proponent of the Green Bank, and as Brian said, was trying to create a national Green Bank, has been for years, as has Senator Blumenthal, quite frankly. So he really wanted to kind of get a sense. We know a lot of seasoned players are really good in the federal money grab gang. So we want to, game. So we wanted to make sure that all of our folks knew exactly what we needed and why. And he came to talk to all of us, several of us, and Bert, and also some of the legislators. There's Chris Cohen is there, Christine Cohen, the chair of the Environment Committee, about what we need, what our priorities are, and how to go after it. And he's very skilled, so he set out enthusiastically to help us, get the kinds of funding that we really need and that we deserve, quite frankly. Bert, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I would only add that he was very focused on how these funds will help people's lives. Okay, and he was very focused on that. Help homeowners, help renters, help small business, and such. And that kind of circles back to what Commissioner Hackett was saying earlier in the conversation. About how do we coordinate and make things work together. So very focused on that, and that's where we are as well. So we're all on the same page.
Great. Yeah, this pileup of subsidy subsidy supports and all kinds of federal funding is a good problem to have. So we just need to stay focused and make sure we're where we need to be. Anybody else? Okay, well, I think it's time.
If not, just congratulations to everybody and Brian and the team. It's that's great news to see, and you know, amazing the journey so far.
Yeah, boy, it sure is. It sure is.
I guess what I would say is it definitely feels like we've landed to the end of the journey. Now our team is looking at what's next. So you all should know that we are very excited by the Inflation Reduction Act, all the credits that are going on there. We really see it as an opportunity to enable a lot of investment to help Connecticut achieve its policy goals. And we're working on a Dream Big strategy that we're going to be bringing back to you in January. So we didn't think this was going to pass when we did our comp plan, but Schumer and Manchin were able to reach agreement, and now we're here. So stay tuned.
Great, great. Okay. So if there are no objections, I'm going to adjourn this meeting of the board meeting of the Connecticut Green Bank. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.